in academia, there are politics too, just about politics in every job.
Boy,
So
oh
sometimes you got
boy,
to deal with the politics and everything else. So,
boy.
but yeah,
Well, politics and relationships.
yeah.
Um, so I remember that you once told me that you drew from your experience as a clinician to be successful in higher education, and that you found patience and fortitude in your enduring belief that this too shall pass. So I wanted to know more about how you think about that adage and how it has given you the wisdom to operate with both calm and patience.
I got that term from my mother, a great Christian woman, basically working class, maybe two or three generations out of slavery. And these are people who really understood what it meant, what hard times were, what difficult times were, because they went through a lot. And so they would say that, and it came from the church as well, that basically this too shall pass. We'll get through this, we will survive this. So that's a kind of an attitude that you almost have to have when you're working with difficult issues. So that was basically what I grew up with.
It's really very interesting. Oh, I'm sorry, Estelle, did you have something else? I didn't want to cut you
No,
off.
that was it.
Okay, great. Um, it's really very interesting because I've heard the same things growing up about this too shall pass. I don't know if it's something in communities, but it's a way of giving hope, I guess, that you can get through this and you can pass this, and there are better things to come. And this
Yeah,
too is not permanent.
yeah. No, I agree with that. That's the second half of it. I think that the idea that not only will we get through this, but there will be a better day. Things will get better.
Yeah, definitely gives hope. So you gave advice, and which we sometimes hear as well, about how to pick your battles.
Mhm.
When to know when it's time to push. So how can you tell us about a little bit about that, about how do you know about how to pick your battles and when to push on those battles? And when you recognize your emotions, when you don't want to get caught up in your emotions when you go through those battles. So can you talk a little bit about that? When to pick your battles, when you know it's time to push, uh, and when the emotions become so caught up, and not to let your emotions, I guess, get so caught up that you lose sight of your goals.
Well, the first thing that I think is understand there is a goal. This is about a particular group of people you're working with. As a clinician, you see that always anyway, that this is not about you. It's really about the person you're working with. Now, I work with high school students, preparing them for college and a higher education institution at a college. So I have to have a lot of relationships at that institution in order to do the thing that I'm trying to do. And that is to prepare young people for college. Now, that basically means negotiating with other departments, dealing with people who are in the line of authority over me. So you have to have a
Mhm.
certain amount of that idea that, hey, this is about the students. And, basically, as a clinician, you have a sense that this is a calling anyway. This is your calling. I'm a clinical social worker, so we're paying attention to. And when I went to social work school, it was a mission, so you had that kind of sense that, hey, this is really not about you. This is about the students. And how can I provide the best service for these students, regardless? What can I do? Who can I work with to make it happen?
I'd like to claw back to the kind of the beginning of that conversation and get a little bit of your advice about roadblocks.
Hmm.
And, um, I know you've said about roadblocks that part of it is actually taking the time to think before just jumping in and acting.
Right.
And then the other part is, or another part is to always be thinking about what is the other way? What can I do to get around
Right.
this roadblock? So could
Yeah.
you expand on that?
Well, this is this whole idea about I have to have a well, my first master's degree is in community planning, and I had an old professor, Bob Tannenbaum, nice guy. He lived in Columbia, and he used to tell all of our students, all of us young students, and I was young, really young then, real young. So he'd say, for every problem, there's an opportunity. uh, and working in communities, we see a lot wrong, but we see some opportunity in that same place. How can we solve this issue, this particular problem? There's an opportunity here somewhere. I mean, the housing is terrible. There's crime here. There are things here, but then, well, maybe there's some ability for us to deal with this housing issue if we get this kind of connection. If we work with this particular community, we can find some money here. So it's almost like thinking that way. For every problem, there's an opportunity. There is somebody there who can get you in, to help you move where you want to move. Um, so sometimes that happens. We're attempting to get our payroll through. We're trying to get students paid with our stipend. Well, something's holding us up some way up the line. This particular VP is moving slowly or ain't moving at all. so, and so we now have to think about, well, how am I get I have instructors who work for me, and how am I get these guys paid? They're going to be disgruntled. How am I going to get this to happen? Well, maybe there's somebody in HR that I do know that I have a relationship with who can say, well, what do you think about this Severio? This is somebody in HR. How does this work? What do you think? Well, we have to do this and I have to do that, but let me get back to you. And we may unlock it from another direction. So it ain't coming from me necessarily, but it is, if you understand what I'm saying.
Mhm. I've been on that situation as administrator at a college, and I have do contracts for my adjuncts and professors and writing up contracts. And yeah, they want to get paid just like everyone else.
Absolutely.
And if there's some difficulty, you do want to address it and think about your resources and your contact people. And I think people realize that when you take it seriously, their problems, they feel that trust and get faith in you that you care about them. And
Right.
instead of you just saying,
Right.
"Oh, I'm sorry, I can't do anything about that," that
Right.
you pick up the phone and you make contacts. And I think people really appreciate that.
Yeah.
So it's great that you talked about that. Yeah.
No, I do think it makes a big difference, and you do care about your folks,
Mhm.
really, and because they're the key, they're the vehicle in which you're operating to get done what it is that you need to get done. To go back to what I said earlier, the students are what we're here for. So the teachers don't work, the students don't get that instruction, and so now we're stuck. So we have to figure it out. It does make a big difference with your people, and they will appreciate you more if you do that bit of fighting. But it's all together, you
Right.
know. You just happen to be the point person,
Right.
the person in the middle, I'd say.
Exactly. And you had talked about an effective strategy as far as when you run into roadblocks, about taking the time to think before you act on something,
Yeah, yeah,
and finding another way to get around that. Because sometimes people, we can be impulsive and passionate. So you want
right.
to talk a little bit more about thinking before you act on it. Because we know, and nowadays, sometimes if you operate and you send that email or a text or you can't take it back.
Right,
And
right, right.
so sometimes you got to think before you act.
Well, there's a one of the things that I try to do, and it's been in my thinking pattern is when things are not quite the way you want them to be and you feel somewhat emotional yourself, I say, now, Greg, you have to be real still. Being real still basically means just that. Don't do nothing, don't say nothing, be real still. Because whatever's going on, you're going to have to move through it, and you have to think about it that way. It's something that's gonna you're going to have to deal with, but you first have to be still. You have to calm yourself and get into that space where you can work. Because emotionally, yeah, we go back to what I said earlier. Don't take it personal. Basically, it may be personal, but don't take it personal. So,
That's true.
and then first you have to be real still and center yourself, and that way you can think. Now, one of the problems with being emotional, too emotional, obviously, is you can't think clearly.
Mm,
And in order for you to think clearly about what you want to do, you have to be. So I say, be real still and then begin to think. And I'm a great talk to yourself kind of person,
mm,
So, okay, now, Grant, how can we do this? Or also, as a clinician, I'm prone to talking to myself about me. Now, what is that about? How come you're so upset about that? Well, it ain't all that. Let's just try to be still for a minute and move through this.
mm,
So
mm,
um, that's how I try to do it. Because I
mm,
working with people and I have a small
mm,
practice. I see people in therapy, couples and individuals who are stuck
mm,
emotionally. They're
mm,
attempting to move through a place that has been difficult for them, but they're so stuck in the emotion that it makes it
mm,
difficult for them to move. And part of the reason they come to see me is for me to kind of help them do that, move
mm,
through, uh,
mm,
look at the roadblock and try to understand what the roadblock is about. Sometimes it's really about you, an old emotion from someplace else, which,
mm,
since this is a clinical discussion, I won't spend any time on that, but it really means be still and think it through.
mm. Great. Thank you. Great advice.
Right?
Mm,
Yeah, Greg, that is a message I wish I had received
mm,
early in my higher education career, before I launched out time after time after